short because it's really hard to say Morgan Community Association for a lot of sentences. So MOCA, M-O-C-A, we're a grassroots association of residents and business persons and property owners and other people who have a stake in the future of Morgan Junction. MOCA's primary purpose, for those of you who don't have that memorized, is to make Morgan Junction a better place to live, to work, to shop at, and enjoy. I had that memorized, and I know by the end of the meeting tonight, all of us will too. At the heart of Morgan are the stakeholders, and that includes you, whether you're a resident or a business person, a property owner, or someone else. If you care about Morgan Junction, you're a stakeholder. Morgan Junction surrounds the intersection of California Avenue Southwest and Fauntleroy Way Southwest for those of you who may never have been there before. So I'm guessing that a lot of you are here tonight because you heard something about something that's new and different that's going on. It's happening in your community, Morgan Junction. Maybe you're scared or upset, and you're wondering, how can that be good for my neighborhood? Aren't there any rules? Isn't anybody paying attention? Well, the Morgan Community Association has been paying attention to the city and watching out for Morgan Junction for the last 20 years. MOCA has asked city staff to come and talk to us tonight, to talk to the stakeholders, all of us, about our neighborhood. We want information about what's happened in the city, what Morgan Junction is facing, what changes are looming, and what we can do about it. MOCA wants you, all of you, as a stakeholder, to be informed about what's going on. So this meeting is about information. It's about getting knowledge, and it's about that knowledge of what's going on around us. This meeting is a time to listen. It's a time to ask questions, to take notes. If you got your agenda, you'll see that there's a big old space for notes. Please use it. And if you need another one and didn't want to share the agenda, there's more up here. It's a time to talk to each other and share, to strategize, to problem solve. It's also a time for respectful disagreements and polite communication. It's about asking questions and listening to the answers. And so if you have a question, I'm going to ask you to please raise your hand and please don't shout out. Know that if you raise your hand, we will get to you. Your question will be answered. You won't be ignored. You won't be forgotten, but please keep it courteous and keep it civil. I really want to stress that. Now, next week, we have a meeting set with the developer of this particular project. He could not make tonight's meeting. When you meet with him, you will have more information about your neighborhood than you had when you first walked into this door tonight. You will have power, because knowledge is power. And you'll have power because you're part of a really great community, Morgan Junction. So I'm going to start out by, I'll be doing the introductions and kind of keeping time so we can keep it at 2 hours. I hope the pizza's gone by the time we're done here. And I'm going to start out tonight by introducing your neighbor, Rob Armstrong.
I say yay, Rob! Now, thank you both to Deb and Cindy and to MOCA for their enormous resources, knowledge, time, cooperation, kind of helping some of us kind of start to navigate all this. And I wanted to just kind of intro a little bit just by talking about really sort of why we're here. And Deb sort of touched on that a little bit in the beginning, but I'll tell the story. I see she's here now, so I can tell the story. Kind of what got us on our little block, and we live on Willow. There's 6 or 7 of us that are super involved. One of our neighbors, I'll just say Jay, because her first name, nicest woman you've ever met. Always nice and sweet, has something nice to say, compliment. Well, she sent an email. She's on the sign you up for the land use on the project. And she was pretty fired up in this email. And all of us were like, holy cow, if she's that upset, there must be something going on here. So we started to kind of dig in and ask questions. So that's kind of how we got involved. And really, what we found out was that there's just a lot of things that have been going on in terms of the urban villages, the city planning, the zoning, and some of the rules. There's just all these other things that are happening. It seemed like this just kind of dropped in our neighborhood. And we were like, how did this happen? And when you start to unravel it, there's a ton of stuff that's been leading up to and kind of supporting it. So anyway, so that's the information, the understanding and the knowledge that we wanted to kind of bring and introduce tonight. And again, thank you to Mocha for sort of facilitating, and thank you to all of our guests from the city for participating and really helping us kind of go through that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. All right, so next I'm going to introduce someone who actually has been watching out for Morgan Junction for 20 years, Cindy Barker.
I'm up to 2 file cabinets now.
You are, and we're not related. I just want to make that really clear. That always is confusing to everybody. Hey, Cindy.
I'm going to give you guys, I mean, really what we're doing is we're trying to save the last hour for us to be able to talk, right? So I'm going to give you the speed date version of the urban villages and what goes on. Marshall is also from the Department of Planning and Development, DPD. He's going to give a little bit more detail than I am. I wanted to set this up so that you understood the urban village and what's going on. And so I'll be talking from the slides that you'll have the handout so you can take notes on them if you want to.
And which one am I bringing up?
Oh, well, let's pick
Just like this.
History of
So she's
Morgan.
got several.
It's like Jeopardy.
Yeah.
History for 200.
So overall, you know, in the state of Washington, back in 1990, they started to try to say, really, that they needed to have a comprehensive way, an integrated way, to deal with what looked like was sprawl that was coming to the state of Washington. And they wanted to deal with issues of density. So the overarching process that we work under is called the Growth Management Act, State of Washington. In reaction to that, Seattle put together a comprehensive plan. Marshall's going to go into some more details of that. But I was also involved in that process too, and that was putting forth it's about this thick, goals and policies that help guide the decisions of all the departments within Seattle, and so that everybody sort of operated from the same playbook. That document underwent a major revision in 2009, and it's about to expire in 2014 with its theoretical 20-year span. So they've already started the process of, you know, getting people involved in the next comp plan. So hint, you know, think about all the places you can plug in. Those of you who love high policy geekiness, there you go. So, in response to the 1990 call for, let's figure out some comprehensive strategy here in Seattle, they developed something called the Urban Village Strategy. It was really going to, they named 37 neighborhoods that looked like they fit some of these goals and policies about pick condensed areas in which to place density, and then that protects the single families around it. So it's a kind of a two-pronged strategy. Protect the single family, and then that way you can focus your resources into smaller pockets. And so Morgan looked at that, and they looked at the criteria, and we're going to cover some of that, and said, then let's proceed. Now, I will tell you that on our neighborhood planning committee, we had people at opposite ends of the spectrum. They said, we don't think this is a smart thing to do because it's just going to screw up our neighborhood. And other people said, we think this is a smart thing to do because then we get at the table and we might get a voice of what's coming to the neighborhood. And when we actually wrote the neighborhood plan, we had some pretty good compromise language that said, all right, for protection, let's not allow overlays, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. For protection, let's do parking studies now so we can see what our parking is so that we can better control how we de-park, you know, because we all kind of knew that was coming, the emphasis on transit. So community work started in 1996. We did tons of outreach. We had several large, what we call big events, trying to draft the plan, and it was voted and accepted by all the neighbors who attended our last final big event. And council went to council in 1999, not without some struggles of, you know, what do the boundaries look like, but in the end, we did not change any of the zoning. We left the village alone, and go ahead. Oh yeah, do I have to change? I didn't even think about that. The big thing was we have a high-level vision, and it covers many, many things. It's in your thing. I'm not going to read it to you. But it does talk about vibrancy, gathering places, strong single neighbor, compatible multifamily, and a community that's conveniently accessible by transit and auto. I mean, reasonable goals. So, next. You told me to march through this, man.
All right, that's good.
The key criteria that we're going to talk about a little bit tonight to give context to what's going on in the neighborhood. When we looked at our maps, and you'll see a map near the end, all the zoning that was existing in place would allow for what was at that time a target of 300 neighborhoods, 300 households. So at the time it said, you've got single family here, and then as you get closer to California, it goes to multifamily, and then it goes to commercial, low-rise commercial, NC 30, neighborhood commercial, 30 feet maximum height. So it kind of stepped up to density, and at 30 feet, not 80 or 100 or anything like that, we had the ability for something that was not built to 30 feet to be torn down, replaced with townhomes, apartment buildings, whatever, and the capacity was there for that target of 300 households. So we went, this is a good deal. I hate to say this with the DP guys in front of us, but it was a good deal because it was already zoned to have density. It could have happened whether we had a neighborhood plan or not. The exchange was because we said, yes, we will be an urban village, and yes, we will take that density. That's how we got the Morgan Junction Park. That's how we can go to neighborhood street funds and get street trees. That's how we get some of the attention that we've gotten to make our amenities better, all around encouraging the density to happen here, not subdivisions in the single-family household neighborhoods. Right? The second thing is, sorry. The second thing is a location along major transit. So Fauntleroy has always been a major transit corridor. California has always been a major transit corridor. We just didn't have the service at the time. But that was something we went, check, if we have continued emphasis on transit, it will happen along corridors that service our neighborhood. That's a sensible thing to look for. And supporting compact living and pedestrian friendly. We are not a large urban village. In fact, our targets are some of the smallest. And then what happened in 2005, I think it was, the neighborhood, or the DPD kind of re-baselined everything, and they dropped our target to 200. So our target is something less than 300. It's probably even something less than 200, the way the math works. Details I don't want to bore you with, but I just want to say that 200 households is calculated at a household. Now, this project that's coming, it kind of starts to screw with us a little bit because it sort of fits in with the thing of micro-housing or not. If you don't have a kitchen unit, which is defined by a stove, inside your unit, then you're not a household. Your household suddenly becomes the floor where the kitchen is located. So in places where micro-housing is going in, one floor with 8 units with one shared kitchen is 1 unit. 8 rooms, sorry, micro rooms is what they're called. So it's kind of like, our math has kind of gone haywire because that was not foreseen. We think DPD should count households differently than they're proposing to. That's in an ordinance that's kind of going through the city right now. It's kind of held up for some appeal work that's going on. Okay, I'm getting to go faster. I think I only got 2 or 3 more slides and then we have that. This is to illustrate to you what's been going on in the neighborhood. And there were some changes here. I mean, we sent letters to DPD. We would analyze what they were proposing, and we would send 15-page memos that say, we went through every single one of our neighborhood goals, and this proposal meets or does not meet our goals. So we did analysis on every single one of these pieces of legislation that went forward that said, this meets or not. Almost every one we said, don't do it to us because we're not supposed to have overlays, but it came because it's an overlay. So that's kind of one of our beefs about this. But you can see that there was a gap while everybody sort of went, okay, urban villages are getting in place. We applied for some small projects. That was when the P patch got built. But the DPD really didn't get up and rocket until about 2004, 2005. Neighborhood business strategy, multifamily changes. And if you're looking at your map, you can see multifamily is a lot of our neighborhood. Workforce incentive zoning. pedestrian zoning was started, and that's going to be a big change for us, potentially, depending on what they put it in. They kind of never finished it, and they picked it up again. We just got notified that they're going to start to rediscuss that topic. But go to the next one, because this is the one where kind of there was some stuff in the multifamily, but the next one is called regulatory reform. DPD goes wild. This is where they went big. The biggest one for us was in urban villages, overlay, poof, you get it, you're an urban village. Frequent transit, quarter mile, no parking. I mean, there was no decrease. We've got the numbers from 2005. Single family had about 1.6 autos per home. Renters had 1.78 autos per home. So they went, okay, inside that urban village, which is a lot more renters than homeowners, you're going to go to 0. There was no step down, no nothing. Nobody in the city, nobody in the neighborhoods really agreed with that, but it is moving them towards their policy. I mean, I have to talk both sides. I recognize that it's a comp plan policy we're trying to hit. There's a neighborhood on the ground that we kind of go, oh, wow, what's that really going to do to us? So there is, this came out of the press release, so I don't want to go through all of them. It reduced some amount of environmental review, home occupation, that was where some live-work type things came into being, and it created more flexibility for ADUs. Also now, the C line started, and a lot of us we're trying to recreate the history, because before Rapid Ride came, we only had buses that ran every half hour. We didn't have anything that ran every 15 minutes. But DPD is telling me that you've always had rapid transit. And I'm going, well, only if you count every bus, you don't count a single bus. So we're trying to figure it out. But no matter what, it's here now. We have Rapid Ride. Okay, if the funding goes through. I already talked to DPD and said, okay, what happens if they cut our service? And they said, you're right. What happens is they would change their map, because it's an advisory map, but when a project is permitted and somebody says, I'm applying for no parking, they usually submit the transit schedules. And so they would look at the transit schedules and go, oh, you're right, like you don't have service anymore, you cannot apply for that parking, parking elimination. So we just have to watch that they do that kind of job correctly, but we'll have to wait and see if the flips would, if it goes over.
But also, that's not retroactive. It's permitted at the time it's permitted at the time of service.
And the reason why is all the folks who live across California on those, California on those really tall apartments, you couldn't do those anymore either. So it's always what the land use code is at the date the permit's applied for, right? And then what we have coming in front of us is inaction of what's called transit-oriented development, continuing to focus, I forget the word, inducements for developers to, incentives, there we go, to put their buildings along transit lines, because that's what they're trying to encourage. Keeping cars off the roads, hopefully eliminating cars for people who choose that kind of lifestyle. It's the key to us in Morgan was we said we want to have a range. If you want to have a car, you should be able to have a car. If you don't want to have a car, you should be able to not have a car and be able to use transit to get around. Those are our ends of our goals. It's like an envelope. Deb stood up. I'm in trouble. Oh, it's your next, right? Okay. So all this plays around density. And so that chart I showed you that had Morgan not filled out, Deb's going to start talking about zoning and density.
So you all have the color version in your handout. It's bright yellow. Don't worry, it's the same thing, it just looks green. If you care about color, don't freak out. Same map. The neighborhood plan was written in '99. Cindy talked about the fact that the zoning was already there now. And with that plan, we were really working hard to do as much as we could to protect the single-family nature of Morgan Junction. In fact, the plan, it's kind of like a broken record. In the plan, it notes several times throughout the planning process that sentiment about protect single family was like over and over again. And many of us are here because that sentiment is still real strong. I care about my home, my property values, my investment, single family. So it's important to remember that those concerns were in place 20 years ago when the planning started. and they're still of a concern today. We heard about the criteria that set up an urban village, able to absorb, initially we were able to absorb the 300 new residential units along that major transportation route, and you can see those routes here, Fauntleroy being the primary and California a secondary, and able to achieve residential densities that support growth. Now, I'm turning my page. So the Morgan Junction location and the zoning, perfect for being an urban village. Let's take a look at zoning, and maybe just a show of hands, how many people love zoning or understand zoning? This is where you get to raise your hand. That's good, that's good. How many?
All the city people.
Not all of them, well, you hope so.
Can I
Anyway,
interrupt for 1 second?
yes, you can.
So I stole these from DPP yesterday. I didn't get enough, but they put out a very handy little thing about zoning. So this is the one that you can learn what can go in a commercial zone, what can go in a single family, and then there's another one for multifamily. So I have enough if you're like one of those people who just raised your hand, except for the city people. You can come get one of these and we will try and get more.
Okay.
That helps with what
So-
Deb's going to cover.
We have lots of this, let's call it this greeny color here, and that is the single-family zone. That 5,000 means that it's one lot per development, and you have to typically have 5,000 square feet to build a house. And that's, I'm just going to use the word semicolon after that because then codes get into place about accessory dwelling units and all those other things that I'm not even going to touch. So you see lots of single-family in Morgan Junction. And then we have, I want to jump to the bottom here, this neighborhood commercial. I know it shows it better in your handout, but this color is our center, our heart, where Earthquake is, and Starbucks, and the bank, and the restaurants. So all of that commercial area is in our center, and that's the zoning for that, neighborhood commercial. Now another key color to remember when you're looking at the map is these middle colors. And Cindy talked about how California has a lot of that multifamily. So this zoning that's called low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise, in another world that would be called multifamily, and other people just kind of cut to the chase and call it apartments. But it's more than a house, or more than a lot with one house on it, okay? So we have low-rise,
I'm just going to
mid-rise.
clarify. You could build a house on it, but
Yeah.
that's not considered the best and highest use of a multifamily zone.
Okay, right, so this is what you could do. So think of low-rise, mid-rise, and high-rise as multifamily, and the lot in question that we're here tonight about, it's in a look at my notes, it's in a low-rise category, and it's low-rise 2, okay? And if you go to the city's website, and I apologize because I was going to print this section out that had all the classifications for low-rise, because there's actually 3 classifications of low-rise, talks about what can be there. Cottages, perhaps, or townhomes, perhaps, or apartments, perhaps. It gives you those different choices to be in a low-rise zone, or different, some other people may say it's a variation of apartments. Townhomes, kind of an apartment. Townhomes are the ones that are stacked, versus an apartment where you're going to have levels like this. A townhome you're going to own. How many live in a townhome? Raise your hand. Okay, a townhome is one unit that you own the whole thing all the way up and down. So, there's your multifamily and your single family.
Deb,
Just a sec.
question.
Like the one, the townhome is like the one on the corner on Willow?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, you guys have a townhome?
Yeah.
Okay,
One
thank
of
you.
the 6.
6 packs.
All right. 6 packs, right. Okay, so I do have some language about low-rise zones. Low-rise 2 is most appropriate for areas within growth areas, like our village, and it calls for a mix of small-scale to multifamily housing. We talked about townhouses, row houses, apartments. All of those are encouraged in this brown area here, over on Fauntleroy as well. Little zoning. So you have the 2 sections, the 2 types of uses. Single family, 1 dwelling unit per lot. multifamily, multiple dwelling units per lot. Does that make sense, kind of? You got a question?
My question is where I'm stuck at is feet.
And that's why I wish I had that chart, because each one of these different zones has, and even within, say, low-rise, there's going to be different height limitations for each, and I apologize that I didn't bring that. Hopefully
But
DPD
we are
can
30
talk about it.
feet. I mean, there's no place along the whole urban village that exceeds 30 feet, and I don't think any over 20 feet. So it's, the highest somebody could go is 30 feet.
In the low-rise, okay?
Hang on.
Yeah.
Cindy, how come it's the higher density is away from the intersection? Why isn't there, the higher density is right at the intersection? Why
No,
is it
this
so
is
far
the,
down?
this is the highest density.
That's the neighborhood commercial.
That's neighborhood commercial,
Yeah, but
30.
there's still, in that zone, there is still single family in there.
Woo, okay.
Yeah.
This is the really important point.
Sorry.
It can be zoned something, but somebody could buy that commercial and they could put a cottage on it.
Yeah, but there, I'm saying that in that area, right there at Fauntleroy, California, those are single family zoning. That's single family zoning.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. I own a piece of that
You
property.
own one block off. You,
But it's
Yeah,
still
you're
within.
right here, aren't you
Right.
here?
Yep.
she's right here. You guys own
No,
that
I'm
block
down,
right there.
I'm down, I'm down.
You're on
Yeah.
here.
This is
But the
Fauntleroy.
question is it's not so far down. It's not, I mean, this
Oh.
apartment is way down.
So the scale on this is a little
Yeah.
hard. I tried to
understand.
capture, here's Holden.
I know.
There's
exactly where it's
Alaska.
at.
So
Yeah.
we're showing all the way from Alaska. So
Yeah, I know.
here's Orchard Street.
Yeah,
So
but I'm
this is
just-
Cafe Ladro.
Yeah, I know exactly where it's at.
Right, so this
My
is
property is,
multifamily.
my property is closer to California and Fauntleroy,
Mm-hmm.
but I cannot build an apartment. I'm 500 feet I'm 500 feet from those.
You could build an apartment.
No, I cannot.
Let's hold this.
Yeah.
Great question, because there's other
Yeah.
folks, I don't think it's for us to
I don't want
answer
to,
now.
I don't want
I hear
to,
that.
I'm just wondering
Well,
why.
we're
What
clear
they
on
can-
what's going on with apartments.
Sorry.
They didn't actually have any rules. They're trying to put them in place. So.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, let's finish up with we have one more slide, and then we're going to
Yes.
switch gears.
I wish I had found the slide that said NC 30, because that always helps people say, oh, 30 feet's the highest you can go.
Actually, I think this slide, this is what Cindy talked about. Here's the criteria for an urban village. On the right side of this is, you can really clearly see why Morgan Junction became an urban village. Did you want to add to that?
The key thing is down here. So we had 1,104 households when we kind of locked in. And the net growth, because I get yearly reports on how many units have been added to Morgan Village, has only been 127. So we are at about 74% of our way to the target, which is like pretty good for a 20-year plan. It may accelerate and blow us up like South Lake Union has had, or Ballard, but
What is an overlay?
an overlay is a city, this is our planner, but an overlay is a city term that they use to say, we want something to be repeatable from area to area. So in urban villages, like let's say somebody decides they're going to build apartments. You put an overlay that says, in a defined area, all the rules are the same. So that applies to all 37 villages, and it helps people because they don't go to Ballard and have a whole different set of codes that they have to deal with, and they come down to Morgan Junction and they're completely different again.
Here's another
It's a
way of
city
looking at that.
mechanism.
Here's single family, here's NC, your RC2 or
40.
your zoning, okay? And this is an overlay that's going to say, under these circumstances, A, B, C, anybody underneath this doesn't have to have parking. And this gets
You're confused.
laid over the
So the
zoning.
exceptions to
Yeah.
the rule.
Yes,
Mhm.
a citywide exception. And they have overlays for station areas, so like all those rapid ride, or the light rail,
Okay.
urban villages, all sorts of
Bunches.
stuff.
Okay, great. So that's the end of the Morgan presentation. Rob, you're going to jump in.
Yep.
Okay,
Good, good.
great. So, switching gears now, we have some guests who have come to answer, to give us information, because that's what we're here for, and answer questions, but we'll have, starting off with Marshall Foster. I'd like to introduce Marshall. He is the City Planning Director with the Department of Planning and Design, and that is, the acronym for that is DPD, and a Morgan resident. Okay, so shopping carts, folks, you'll see each other.
Yeah.
At Driftway, take it away,
That's
Marshall.
right. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation to come out, Deb. And I do, in fact, live in the neighborhood, so you can see me around with my kids. So, first thing I just wanted to say is I realize there's a lot of concern about some of the new development in the area, and I don't want to pretend like that's not a real issue. Seattle's going through a really interesting period right now, and interesting is a euphemism, you might say. There's just a lot of development happening in Seattle. A lot of what you've seen have been in the larger areas like South Lake Union and the downtown. Part of what we're going through are some growing pains. It has actually been planned for some of these things to happen. What's interesting is that it's happening relatively quickly. A lot of this has been, Cindy, you laid it out very well. I mean, the comp plan with the GMA, the Growth Management Act, has been underway since the 90s. But we're undergoing kind of one of the fastest periods of growth in the city that we've seen in decades, really. So I'm just going to really quick add a few things because you got a lot of the context that I usually have to present, so thank you. About the comprehensive plan, just a few things I wanted to add. So that map on the right shows you the whole landscape of what we call urban centers and urban villages. The Growth Management Act, the goal of that was really to bring growth into the parts of the region that had services and had infrastructure that could support growth, and to take pressure off of the single-family areas of cities like Seattle. That was really a key part of it, and I think describing it as a two-pronged strategy is a good way to take pressure off those neighborhoods. But equally important was to take pressure off of the rest of our region and take pressure off of our natural areas and green spaces as well. And you can see how that lays out. Areas like Morgan are actually taking a relatively small share. You know, the vast majority, more than 50%, is in the downtown core. South Lake Union, you've all, I'm sure, read about that, or you've seen the development that's taking place there. And then much more modest distribution of growth out to those neighborhood urban villages. And as was described, the planning effort, in most of these parts of the city, we already had zoning in place that would accommodate multifamily development, neighborhood commercial development. What the intention of this was to say, okay, well, how can we really allocate that out to make sure that we have a good strategy to channel growth to the right places, and also, frankly, to help neighborhoods understand that change was coming, but this was part of a bigger strategy. That we needed to find a way to manage that growth. I realize once it's happening, that can sometimes be less appealing, but that was the thinking at the time. You all, I think, we've already talked about the kind of regional strategy. So I thought you might be interested to know how we've done it. Okay, so this started in the 90s. The first comprehensive plan was adopted in 1994. It was updated in 2004, and I'll say a little bit about our update process that's underway right now. We've seen since '94 nearly 100,000 new residents in Seattle. The vision for the comprehensive plan was that 75% of that new population would go into the urban centers and the urban villages. Since that time, 73% of the growth has been in those centers and villages. So again, the plan has been relatively successful in channeling the growth to these areas. Obviously, it means those centers and villages are seeing change. They're seeing things on the ground that, reflect that change. Let me say a little bit about, if you read the comprehensive plan, which is a 1,000-plus page document, so you may not all want to go home and put that on your bedside table. What are some of the major ideas that drive it? Obviously, accommodating the city's share of regional growth. Something that's important to understand is we don't really get how to say this. Growth is coming to cities like Seattle, whether we like it or not, at a certain level. And our job as planners is to work with you to come up with the best way to plan for it. Sometimes I have conversations with people and they say, well, why can't we just say no? And the reality is, this is such an attractive city to be in that it's going to continue to happen. The strategy is to accommodate it in the best ways, really focusing on places like the Morgan, where you have a neighborhood business district. Those places actually thrive on household density, having people living close by to support institutions like Thriftway, small restaurants. And so when we did this plan, there was a real understanding that there was an economic development benefit as well. If we could concentrate more housing close to services, it could help support those services. I talked about minimizing impacts on single-family areas. It is important to know, we had a little conversation, some of those areas that are zoned for multifamily and neighborhood commercial, if you look at them today, they have single-family homes on them, okay? There's a big difference there that's important to understand. And if you want, we can look at the property map in more detail to try to help answer your question. Making efficient use of existing infrastructure and planned investments was a big part of this. And I don't want to hide this aspect of the plan at all. Building on transit is a really important part of the comprehensive plan. I think you all know what it's like in the city right now. As we're growing, we're not able to add a new street grid. We have to work with the street system we have. And so it's really incumbent on us as a city to get creative about using that space more efficiently. The goal is not to make everyone ride the bus and ride a bike. It is to make those options viable for people if it works for you. And I realize that sometimes you look at a project and there are tough trade-offs with that, but that is the strategy, is to try to make those options available when it works for people. Okay, and I'm just about to finish here. So parking policy, let me just say a couple things because I know that's the key issue here. First off, it's grounded in that overall approach. The idea was to provide more flexibility on the provision of parking in those parts of the city, in the urban villages and the urban centers. And the goal was to link that to where transportation service was going to be focused in the future. Once the comprehensive plan was completed and then updated in 2004, the city did several zoning code updates, and that is something that our office is directly involved in. Every zoning code update we do involves a lot of community engagement. It is ultimately adopted by the mayor and the city council. Okay, so we don't make these decisions and just go do them, but it involves our elected officials. We updated the commercial code, which deals with neighborhood commercial zoning, the core of the Alaska Junction, the very core of the Morton Junction. And then in 2011, we updated the multifamily code, which deals with that low-rise zoning that was discussed. And in 2011 and 2012, that code was expanded to include this concept of frequent transit service. So identifying places where there was a high enough level of bus service that parking policy could be changed. Now let me get down to the real brass tacks of what are the parking requirements in this area. So right now, in urban villages, the way that the city's established policy works is that there's no parking required in an urban village if the location is within a quarter mile of a transit stop with frequent transit service. What does that mean? What is frequent transit service? Okay? The definition is that there has to be transit with a frequency of at least every 15 minutes for 12 hours of the day for 6 days a week as a minimum. And then at other times it has to be at least every 30 minutes. Okay? So that is the policy that was established in the city. Yes, Cindy?
So this is cutting hairs, but just to make sure. We used to understand that it was 15-minute headways, which means a bus came every 15 minutes, a bus. But the way you just said that out loud made me say, so if I have a stop and I have a bus that runs once an hour, but I have 5 buses that service it, is that frequent bus service?
And what if all the buses are full?
You have to have the headway. So there has to be a service
Still tied to a
of...
single line.
No, it's at that stop there has to be service at that. It doesn't have to be one bus line.
It can be a
So-
combo.
Yeah, that's.
It can be a combo.
I guarantee 90% of the city understands it to be bus.
Right, and that was your point about there was some thought about what did the rapid ride trigger this, and actually it didn't, because as again I ride the rapid ride, I'm sure many of you do. Prior to that, we had several lines that were consolidated as part of the rapid ride service. Those had this pretty similar frequency actually, when you look at the two side by side. So this was actually in place even before the rapid ride.
So let's
started.
Marshall finish
Let me
up,
just
and then,
finish,
because
and then,
he is going to add time for questions.
So, that's the core thing, and then outside the villages, there is the ability to reduce the parking requirement for residential by as much as 50%. Now, in terms of, why are we doing this? I can see some people are shaking their heads. I appreciate the concern about this. The goal was to let the market have some flexibility. Okay, what we've seen across the city is that overall, while there are some projects like the one that folks are concerned about that don't provide parking, the average is about 60 to 75% of once this requirement is lifted, that's where the market chooses to develop. Because obviously in many cases, people want the parking in order to rent or purchase a unit. And we look at an average overall as working out to around 60 to 75. That's been.
Are you talking developers, or are you talking us, the neighborhood? Define market.
Market is, yeah, what developers are providing. So we look at, we go out and look at the projects that are actually being built. How much has been provided.
Yeah, some of them do.
So I'm just, providing you with the information on average. That's been the average in new development. Is that 60 to 75% do provide parking? Yeah.
So this is driven by the mass transit being close by and by developers, not by projected cars on the road.
So what we find is that typically when you provide the transit service and that option is viable, and I know some of you will argue whether that's viable or not, then that gives the flexibility. It's really about the home decisions that people want to make. So we see an increasing number of people who are willing to and interested in economizing by owning fewer vehicles and using that transit service. Okay, and so this provides that flexibility. Before that, the developer was required to provide parking regardless of whether transit was an option for people or not.
Are there studies on that we can look through?
There are actually. The county did some work with us looking at what's the kind of available parking levels and what's working in different neighborhoods, and looked at the whole region. And that's a study that I'm happy to make available to you. So I brought, just in case people are interested, I brought the actual rules that we use for defining if an area has frequent transit service, and whether a project actually, the process that an applicant in our office would have to go through to determine whether a site has sufficient parking. I want to confirm something that you said, Cindy, because I think it's important, which is that this is in real time. This is determined as projects come in. So if a project comes in and the frequent transit service is in place, they go through and fill out a checklist and show that it's in place, and then a permit is issued. So if service changes, there's no way that we can go back and eliminate that permit down the road. So do you want me to take questions now? Is that happy to do it however you want?
We do have time at the end for questions.
I'm going to put these at the door here.
Now, because I know you had one. Did you had one? 1, 2, and 3 questions. Just to cover those now, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. We will make sure to get everybody's questions at the end, so please don't worry. Right here.
Well, my first question is that you're not securing that transit when you're making the recommendations for no parking. So in other words, there's a real disconnect, and you don't even have the authority to secure that for the neighborhood or for the people that are moving into these buildings. Is that correct?
So this was something that was discussed a lot with the city council when we went through this discussion last year. And yes, there's no way, the city can't guarantee that service. They debated this quite a bit about, and their ultimate deliberation was they felt confident that ultimately the service would be there in the long term.
No, you know, it would be.
But it's not.
Yes.
So, and I'm not sure if you're getting into the service cut plan and all that sort of
And
issue.
that's a good point that I'm just going to remind everybody is that we have folks here from the city of Seattle, but they who made that decision, who deliberated on that, is the city council. Those are the folks that we elected, and they're the ones who made the yay or nay on that, okay? They deliberated, had the discussions, city council. Okay?
Right, but did DDD make the recommendations to the city council?
That's what a staff person does, is evaluate and make recommendations. They don't make the decision.
Right, but they made
The council makes the recommendation. And I'm sorry, but I've had enough times in my career that the council has thrown my recommendation out the window as fast as I can say my name, Mark, or Paul.
The question is I understand the urban village and all that, it's all great and all that, but Morgan is kind of a special little spot, and it's not for just because we all live here. The difference is we have to put up with all the traffic that comes from the ferry every day. And when they come up Fauntleroy, if they can't go up Fauntleroy, they go up all the side streets. And they come down all the side streets. And if you live in the neighborhood, you cannot turn into your own street. You cannot get out of your own street. So let's throw more cars onto the streets because there's no parking for these apartments. So is there no special, because of the neighborhood, is there no special circumstances that might say, hey, maybe we should make this place here offer parking.
So actually, there are instances of that. In the comprehensive plan and in the city parking policy, there were exceptions made in a few specific instances. An example here close to home for us all is Alki Beach. At that location, because so many people come there from across the region, the parking requirements are more strict.
But
Okay.
we have that every day, winter, summer, spring.
Fair point. One of the things I want to emphasize, just so you, part of your goal tonight is to know how can you affect
Right.
change in your neighborhood, and that's, one of the things I want to help you with. The comprehensive plan is going to be updated right now, or not right now, but over the course of the next year, we're going to be updating that. That's something you should pay attention to, and we will be out in the community talking about that. It
But this
sets
will-
the high level.
This will already be done.
Well, I appreciate that. I understand that. This project's already in the permitting
But
process.
please, join us, because this project's done, and if you guys all, whatever the result of this project is, and you all go away, that leaves the Boca board still fighting for some other neighborhood that is gonna wake up one day and go, how did this happen? We really, really want you guys to engage in your community. Please sign in,
Because it's MoCA will be the venue for the city to come and talk
Right.
to us
And
about
you
comprehensive plan
can
update.
come to those sort of venues when we debate what they're proposing, or, when we bring
Right.
forward, and you could say, look what happened in our neighborhood. We need to get in and testify that it shouldn't happen.
So,
We need to write petitions.
So also part of my question though is what I just said to you about the traffic that we have to put up with every day from the ferry.
Wait,
Is
so-
that even going to be in consideration for this project at the top of?
It's not, the way the permit process works now, it's not one of the considerations.
But I wrote it down because I went, really? We could write an exception into the comp plan, which is coming up and is going to be available and opened up for vivisection?
For the future.
So we should propose an amendment to the comp plan, because every year they go through a cycle to propose amendments.
Okay.
Right on.
So,
I'm sorry.
Debbie,
was
the
one
comp
more
plan can be
question.
amended by any citizen.
Yes, that's right.
Tell
Yes.
them that.
And you had one question, then we're going to move on. Sir, please.
Well, I have more than one question. but
I
it
need
depends
one question
on how you
out of
answer this. Is this permit a done deal?
I'm going to have Jerry talk about that.
We'll get into that in just a second.
Because there's the supervisor who's reviewing that permit. He
Is
can
the
tell
point of
you.
this meeting to inform us on why it's gonna happen?
We're here to tell,
Actually,
everybody's here.
I'm sorry. You have to know the history. You have to know what your options are then,
How can you
right?
call it planning when you allow 30 units to go in, when it's gonna negatively impact
No.
the single-family people that live on the side streets? Are you gonna?
Because now you know why
Is there a
that,
covenant on these units
Yeah,
where they're
Sir.
gonna sell them to people that don't have
Sir.
cars?
yeah, I'm not trying to argue with you, but
And
the
that they
last
can't
half of this
have,
meeting wants to
That their
be,
friends can't come over and park,
These are
if their
all
friends can't
really
have
good
cars either?
questions, and I'm going to need us to move on,
Oh,
okay?
Well,
Did we cover everything we
this
needed
is
to cover?
not planning.
All right, and you're here to,
I'm
because
here
we're
for the
going
direction.
into the next
Oh,
part. We need to move on because we have another presenter right now, Mike Kent, with the community, he's a community development specialist with the Office of Housing. And Mike works in the affordable housing arena.
That's correct. So thank you again for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here. I can't say that I get to come to Morgan too often, so I'm very happy to be here. As Deb mentioned, I work for the Office of Housing, and our primary goal is to make strong, healthy communities, of which a vital part is ensuring that households from a variety of incomes, all incomes, can afford to live there. So just to build on some of the things that Marshall mentioned, yes, as we all see, rents are going up in the city, demand for apartments is going up, the population is going up, all these things are pretty clear to anyone in this room, anyone in this city. Neighborhoods all across the city are seeing rent increases. But why is that happening? What we're seeing is that a lot of the people that are moving to Seattle, more so than say 5-10 years ago, are choosing to rent. Those people are also making higher incomes than they did in the past. So they have more money to spend on those apartments that they are renting. So we're seeing a lot of apartments being built in the city, and it's our job at the Office of Housing to make sure that the development that does take place provide some place for affordability. So I'm going to tell you about just a few programs that our office oversees. They're located in this report that there are plenty of copies of. If you don't have one, come see me. The first that I'd like to talk to you about is the housing levy. In 2009, voters passed a housing levy that allowed our office to provide financial support to nonprofit and for-profit to nonprofit developers to build affordable housing in the city. Every year we award financial grants or loans to developers to build affordable housing in neighborhoods all around the city. In addition to that, we oversee what's called the multifamily tax exemption program. That's a program that I actually work on day in and day out. And what the multifamily tax exemption program does is allows for 20% of the units in new projects to be income and rent restricted for lower income households. The incentive to the developer is that they can then receive a property tax exemption for up to 12 years. The Morgan Junction is one of the 39 neighborhoods in the city that participates in the MFTE program. Currently, there is only one project that from this neighborhood has applied to participate in the program, but we're certainly hopeful that as development continues in this neighborhood, that the developers who are choosing to build here opt to participate in the MFTE program. One last program that we offer is called HomeWise, and it is a little bit of a different program, but essentially it's focused on making sure that homeowners can have energy efficient homes, which is a different way of providing affordability, but I think as any of us knows, during these cold winter months, and energy inefficient homes certainly adds to a higher energy bills. So that's another program that our office provides. But with that, I would love to answer any questions that anyone has about affordable housing in the city, about any of the services that our office provides. Yeah.
Can you clarify the MFTE?
Yeah.
If they can option into that?
Yes.
And up to 20%, but they don't have to do the full 20% to
No,
get
it's
the tax rate?
a minimum of 20%.
Minimum 20%
Yes.
of the units?
Of the units.
And
And
then
it
what
needs-
is the lower income? Because it's not low income, it's lower. Is it
Right,
like 8%
so-
AMI?
It depends on the unit type. It's generally a maximum of between $40,000 and $50,000 per year, again, depending on the household size and the unit type. But that doesn't mean that it's not available to lower income households, or even the lowest of low income households. It simply means that the maximum that's allowed is higher than more restrictive programs.
So they can choose to have lower income?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
But
in
they're-
fact, many of them do.
But what's the incentive for them to do that?
It's a tax exemption, so.
Do they get more of a tax exemption if they go lower income? Okay. that's-
Well, no, not necessarily. It's, if they participate in the program, then they receive a property tax exemption for up to 12 years.
12 years is the max.
The max, yeah.
Okay.
And it's only new construction.
It is almost 99% new construction. There is a clause that allows older buildings to participate, but only if they've been vacant for a minimum of 12 months. So that's almost never been taken advantage of, but it is a possibility.
Question here?
Yeah.
Are the apartment pods that are built in Capitol Hill and proposed here, are they part of the affordable housing mix that you consider?
You know, it's one piece of the puzzle. It's not affordable housing for everybody, but it is housing that is provided at a generally lower cost to people who choose to live in those units. So it's certainly not the be-all, end-all of affordable housing, and I wouldn't pretend that it is, but it is one piece of the puzzle.
So it is part of what you consider, because from a owner's standpoint, the cost that you get, the return that you can get per square foot is a hell of a lot higher
Absolutely.
than if you build a luxury 3-bedroom penthouse.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, from the owner's standpoint, it's a great return.
Well, the question on the 6917 project, the permitting says market rate housing, so is it part of the?
So it's not, so let me just sort of re-answer that question. So we wouldn't consider that subsidized affordable housing. It's affordable in the sense that it's less expensive than perhaps a $1,600 studio. Yes, in that regard, it's affordable. But is it subsidized affordable housing? No, it's not.
So that answers your question about the market?
Yep.
The market in this back there, ma'am?
Yeah, did you do any studies for affordable in car ownership? Like if they have affordable, do they own a car or not?
There are studies that have been done that look at home ownership, that look at car ownership rates among renters versus homeowners. So there's that, for sure.
And what's the general point on it? What's the general? Do most renters own cars?
To be honest, I don't know what the exact number is, so I'm not going to.
Could you get that for us?
Sure.
Woo, that would be great. You can get that information for us. He's writing it down, give us that.
And Marshall, you said,
Yeah, there's a great study by the county that we're happy to share.
Okay, so first we'll go in the blue and then in the red, okay? I would want to write.
While he's writing that down, anybody who's a data junkie, talk to me because I've got the link to the census and I can't figure out how to get to, because you can get it, but I can't figure out how to run it. So
Okay.
anybody who's at home.
All right, in the blue.
Do you know what type of housing is actually going into that project? What is it?
Into,
And the
69,
no, it's
70.
not a
yeah,
project that I worked on
6917.
myself.
Excuse me?
It's not a project that I myself,
Oh.
or
We
that
are
our
gonna
office
have-
is actually.
We are going to have some
Oh,
folks,
okay,
and the
thanks.
planner, the folks who are actually
Okay.
reviewing that, they're going to talk next. In the red, please.
Quick question about a developer who gets the permission to have the 20% unit
Yeah.
subsidized. Does the subsidization of the real estate tax go along if the building is sold 5 years down the road? Does it continue an additional 7 years? Or does it
Yes.
end with that?
As long as the future owner continues to provide 20% of the units
Okay.
at the rates that we mandate, then yes.
Okay, so we didn't know where to put this. We didn't know where to put this, but how many know that the developer owns the lot next to where this project is proposed?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So he is putting this high-density unit on one lot, then the next one over is townhomes, and the next one over is 2 single-family.
Back of the
Yeah.
townhomes.
Yes. So he is not building to the best and highest use, right? I'm just saying, he could put 2 of these, 3 of these side by side, right? So we think this is all part of a housing strategy on his part to say, I'm a developer, I'm trying to suit market need. Here are some units that attract a certain type of people with no cars and da-da-da. Here are some townhomes and they'll have parking and here's some. So,
Baloney.
you know, when we talk this project, when you talk it into isolation, there is also this other consideration that the same developer is doing something completely different right next door, so.
Okay, good point. All right, so we're going to, I'll give you one more, and then we'll get on to, back to DPD.
I was just wondering, either in the affordable housing or in the comp plan, are there any programs that support like car sharing or bike sharing or other alternative transportation modes? You know, if we're
I can say that it's certainly something that we love. Speaking only from the affordable housing piece, I can say that it's something that we definitely love to see in the projects that are getting financing through our office. But as far as I know, it's not something that we mandate.
models. Are there any models in the city?
It's highly encouraged in our zoning, especially in areas where the parking is not required.
Okay. So that was it, except I get to ask one last question because I'm running. So subsidized comes from,
Housing levy,
and the housing levy comes from?
voters. And we're coming up for another vote in 3 years, in 2016.
And so when a housing levy comes up, the city comes and asks for money to achieve goals like this. So you can see when you mark yes or no on your ballot, these are the folks who administer that program that has been approved. And these are the things that they work on. I just wanted to make that clear because sometimes I have a real disconnect with something that I check on my ballot and the people who sit in there and work with it every day. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Moving here for questions?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, we are moving along now. Jumping from housing back to DPD, and I'd like to introduce Jerry Suter. He's a technical supervisor in the land use department of Planning and Development, also known as DPD. And take it away, Jerry.
Okay, thank you. I was asked to talk a bit about the regulatory framework we use for permits, and that's basically in more simple terms, how do we decide who gets a permit and who doesn't get a permit? And I think we'll try to keep just a simple discussion about that. We have probably on any given year anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 permit requests that come to the department. People want to build a deck, they want to build an accessory dwelling unit, they want to build a house, they want to convert their duplex into a triplex, they want to convert their fourplex into a duplex. We get it all. And for the most part, if you can show us that you meet a whole set of rules, and it's actually a bunch of sets of rules, we issue the permit in most cases. And we don't have a choice. So if you've got a house and you want to put an addition on, and you can show that you meet the setback requirements, parking requirements if there is one, height limit, whatever the other requirements are for where you're located, you show us that on a set of plans, we check it and we go, yeah, you meet all the code requirements, here's your permit. We are not going to ask your neighbors if they like that you're going to put an addition on. We're not going to tell you we don't like it. We are going to issue that permit. That covers probably 90% of the permits that we do. They're like that. They're not necessarily over the counter, some of them take a lot of analysis. Some pretty good sized buildings can get built that way. There's another group of permits, maybe 10% of those, so that 500 to 1,000 a year, where the department actually has to apply more discretion than just as simple, does it meet the code or doesn't. And that's the group of permits we usually refer to as master use permits. That's the section that I work in. And a project that needs one of those master use permits is proposed over on California that I think many of you know about, that I think had a lot to do with how this, why this meeting happened tonight. So there's different kinds of master use permits, just kind of briefly. There's permits that are large enough that they're not exempt from environmental review under the State Environmental Policy Act, SEPA. That's the kind of application that we've got going on in California. There are some other master use permit types you probably hear of occasionally. One is design review. So projects that are over certain thresholds may need to go, may be required to go through a design review process.
How many have heard of design review? Raise your hand. Yay, okay, good.
Terrific. How many have been to a design review meeting before? Excellent. So there are some other master use permit types that you hear about. There's short subdivisions. We do a lot of those throughout West Seattle. We've had quite a few of them. When people build townhouses, they usually want to sell them off as opposed to rent them. And the general preference in the industry is to not condo them, but to sell them individually so that people can own the land underneath. We do a lot of those. Those are called unit lot short subdivisions. Another type you hear about is called variance. That's for people who have a property-related hardship. I remember one site, it was a triangle-shaped property in a single-family zone that wasn't built on, and it was a legal building site. But when you took off the 20-foot front yard and you took off the 20% of the lot depth for the rear yard and the side yards, they could build something that wasn't much bigger than a telephone booth. That's a property-related hardship. That doesn't mean they got to build on the whole site, but we did give them relief from standards. We don't do a lot of variances. This application over on California is not requesting a variance. Those variances, those are ones where we have to decide, do they get to have it or not? That is kind of a rare decision for us. Most of the master use permits are really a lot like the other building permits, where if you meet all the rules, you get to do what you want to do, but we may have to take certain considerations under play. So one of those is for projects that are not exempt from SEPA, we need to look at environmental impacts. And that's based on SEPA policies that the City Council has adopted. And based on those policies, we can mitigate certain impacts. So if a project is going to have a big impact, we may say it's appropriate for them to change the project in a certain way to minimize that impact. And as long as they do that, they get their permit. The design review projects, it's more about things like how does this building fit the character of the neighborhood? And so the design review board informs the department before we make a decision on those projects. But again, it's not so much about whether we're going to approve a project or not. And that gets to that question that was asked a bit earlier. Gee, is this a done deal? Are you going to approve it?
Yeah.
I would have to say that the vast majority, nearly every permit that can show they meet everything, they get their permits if they follow through and mitigate the issues that need to be mitigated. So that's really what it's going to come down to. For this project, are there environmental impacts that need to be mitigated, that they're not mitigating with the current proposal, that we can identify, realize what needs to happen, tell them what needs to happen, and if everyone agrees that that is the appropriate mitigation, that's what's going to happen. The process for that is we ask for public comment to help make sure we are considering all the impacts we need to consider. And so that's what the public comment period is for. We analyze that. We make a decision. We're going to write up an analysis of what we think the situation is. We're going to make a decision. That decision may have in it conditions that this project needs to be changed in certain ways to do X, Y, or Z. If anyone disagrees that we got that right, they can appeal. And that appeal goes to the city hearing examiner, who is an administrative law judge that is not part of DPD. And that person will review the situation by holding a public hearing. They'll take testimony, they'll look at all the documents, they'll look at all of the rules that we have to interpret and follow to see if we made the right decision or not. We have a pretty good track record with the hearing examiner. I'd say she agrees with us more than not, but does she always agree with this? No, she doesn't. So if we say this project needs to change in this way and has to have this mitigation, if the public thinks we got that wrong, anybody can file an appeal. If maybe you're happy with it, you go, yeah, DPD got it right. You're actually, if they do all of that, this project's going to be okay enough. We're happy with it. The developer may say, DPD, you overreached your authority, and they may appeal. It's not uncommon that we get appeals from both sides. So the applicant thinks DPD's asking too much of them, and the neighborhood's going, there's no way, you guys aren't anywhere near doing enough. So that gets vetted through that appeal process. If anyone disagrees with the hearing examiner, that can go on to Superior Court if anybody wants to take it that far. We don't get too many of those. So that's kind of how the permitting process works. And I guess I'll see, do you want to take any questions now, or do you want to just keep moving on here a bit?
A few, let's do 4 questions, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm 5.
Let me mention one more thing.
Yeah.
So the planner that I've assigned to do the review is here tonight. That's Carly Guillory. And she is still taking comments about the project. We like them in writing so they can be part of the record. That's really wonderful. That gets passed on to the hearing examiner if there's an appeal. So, stuff in writing is really terrific.
Has anybody here written a comment, sent in a comment? Raise your hand. Okay. Just curious. Keep going, Jerry. Sorry.
So, Carly is here. I think we may be able to answer some questions. I'm hoping we don't get too much into detail about the actual project, but I think we can take some questions that'll help you out with that. We do have a public meeting coming up that was requested by petition. Enough if you were interested, and when that happens, we're glad to have a public meeting. So that's coming up. I think the notice is going out on Monday.
Yeah, I think we'll hear about what that date is. And that, again, that is a meeting that DPD presents at. They run that meeting. This meeting is different because MoCA is presenting this meeting. So, sir, you were first with questions?
Yeah, you mentioned something about environmental considerations or can you explain that and let me know what kind of examples
Good question.
are
Yeah.
environmental in nature?
Environmental in nature, impacts to air, to transportation, to public services, to the environment. It's pretty widespread.
This is an environmental checklist. This is a kind of and this is the applicant's environmental checklist with my scribbles. But this is the document that's produced by the state of Washington that any jurisdiction who has this environmental review process, most of them should, they use this, and it's a generic question where you, sorry, I don't cite things because I'm cheap. There's a question and a place for the applicant or the developer to respond. And it's the same question on every single one of these checklists. And they're filled out by the developer, and then DPD reviews them. And this is where you get that and find out, are there any environmental impacts from what's going on based on this checklist? Not based on what somebody thinks.
It comes from the developer, it doesn't come from...
The developer answers the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, and the city reviews it and decides if there's an impact. So environmental checklist, because there really is one. That answered your question? Vlad?
Well, first of all, I want to say, in terms of the hearing examiner, just bear in mind that it takes tens of thousands of dollars to go there, and it's not like you go there and I'm like going to be the average citizen and you're going to get listened to, because there are going to be attorneys from the other side that are going to be working it pretty hard, and they pay a lot of money from the other side. So it's not really a very equitable process. But one thing that I do want to ask about, because this is a very unusual building type, the apartment type, and given that the Growth Management Act specifies a rational, comprehensive process that then gets translated into a comprehensive plan to things that become the Seattle Municipal Code, there has to be a rational process for a particular building type. And here you've got L2 zoning, and you can look at any of the information the city provides on that. This is not accounted for in that, because you have developers exploiting the loophole with this 8 unrelated people per unit. So at many times, DPD could have stepped in and said, there could have been a director's rule that said, you know what, we don't interpret it this way, we say no. It didn't happen.
Actually, Vlad, this particular project, I know that it's 10 studios per floor, no shared kitchen.
I'll finish what I have to say,
Yeah,
because
I just wanted to
actually I
clarify
can't
that
stay
for
here
you.
very long. So, the fact is, this building type was never vetted in a public process of any kind, and it just appeared across the city, and it was through a loophole. It was not through a rational process that follows the Growth Management Act. So when I hear comments about, oh, you know, we do this and we have a process, that's fine, there is a process. But this never went through any channel to arrive to the point where it could get permitted.
I didn't really hear a question there. I think it's an interesting comment. One of the things that we have seen is the city has changed a number of rules, and I think we've tried to have a comprehensive approach at doing that, and Marshall addressed a lot of what we were trying to do and why and how it got that way. There is always the possibility, and I've seen this every time we do code changes. If we do a code change here, and we do a code change there, we have good reasons usually why we do those things. Sometimes we start seeing some development that looks kind of like something over here. And what I've seen in the nearly 30 years I've been with the city, is with the department, is that when we need to readjust, we do. It sometimes takes us time. I don't know if this is something that is going to be looked at differently, but we do have some other things happening about micro units, and I think that's the first thing to figure out how that's going to shake out.
I can just say,
But I appreciate your comment.
as an urban designer, I can tell you that there's an entire field out there that's devoted to predictability in urban design to arrive at good solutions that fit its neighborhood.
This doesn't fit.
And that's what's missing.
Appreciate the comment.
Just
Paul?
can
Oh,
I
sorry.
add
Go
one
ahead.
quick thing? Glad to see
Hey,
it.
Marshall.
So my understanding, and Carly will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe the particular project that many of you are here related to, those are not apartments, is my understanding. They're studio apartments, small, but they're not the apartments. But to your point more directly, Vlad, I just wanted to let you all know, the city council does have before it legislation that would help to make the process for apartments, or what we call micro housing, more consistent with other housing types, applying design review thresholds, other things to it. I appreciate the point you're making about how they've come to be, but we are trying to rationalize that process, and that is moving through. It is moving through the process. Admittedly, it's not in place now, but we are trying to address that.
Paul?
So from what you were saying earlier, it sounds like this is, and I hate to, because I know we're having a meeting about this project next week, or on the 19th. But
Did
if
everyone hear that? The meeting?
Yeah.
Say it loudly, Paul.
the meeting set up by Carly and the city is December 19th at 6:30 at night on Senior Center on California Avenue. I don't know the address. Do you know the
It's all
address?
right.
Everybody knows.
Well, there'll be flyers. There'll be plenty of flyers out, but you'll get it.
But, so is that what you wanted to?
Well, the question was, so if this is, basically, if you've looked at it and you think that it's going to be approved, then how far out are we looking at the approval after the meeting on the 19th? And then how long do we have after that we can go and talk to the next step to see who can look at it and say, well, maybe this is not right. So my question is, how far out are we?
How many projects are already gonna go, you mean?
No, I'm talking about this particular, I don't care about any other right now, except for this one up here. So when you decide, when you make your
When's the
decision,
building permit going to be issued?
when are we looking at that? What date are we looking at? February, March, January, December? And then after that, how long do we have to go to the review board, or the next step, whatever?
If someone wants to appeal.
You're right.
We need to first determine whether we have all the information we want to try to get from the applicant. Now, recognizing that the SEPA checklist is what the applicant says the impacts are, and if you read enough of these,
Right.
the developers are pretty good at saying, oh, no, NA, and then they put in a little bit of here or there. And we can see through a lot of that.
Right.
And that's probably why we have this process, but we can see through a lot of, even when people don't comment and aren't concerned, we still do a lot of effort on these things, so we can kind of see that. We don't know fully everything we're going to get out of this and what we're going to ask the developer on. We do know that one of the SEPA policies that was changed to put some predictability in is the code, when it was changed to say no parking, was also changed to say that the decision maker no longer has the authority to use parking impacts as a basis for mitigation within the 1,320 feet of frequent transit stop in an urban village. So what that means is we are not going to use SEPA to say, even though the zoning code says don't put in parking, you have to put in parking because there's going to be parking impacts. That isn't something we are able to do under the code at the moment. That will not be in the decision.
Okay. Diane, did you have a question?
I did, and actually Vlad kind of hit on one of them, because I had asked a
One
question
question.
at another meeting about how much it really costs to appeal. And it's true what he said, because I know on a small lot that they had to pay the fee, which is what, $85 plus $50,000 in attorneys to
Okay.
fight it out. My question is, based on what his long statement, and I agree with all of it, is will there be any transparency and real opportunity for public input in the future? Because when the zero parking thing happened, I've been going to design reviews for years at that point. And I didn't hear anything about it until the Nova design review, when all of a sudden we went, oh my God, how can you have 35, 40 apartments with 6 parking spaces? And there are professional people that learn how to do the loopholes, to do the micro-housing and all. And then we find out about it 2 years later. Is there going to be more transparency in really letting the public know about these things so we can get input before it goes to city council? Because I watch the city council meetings, I know you guys do your presentations, and then based on that, the city council votes on things. But if we don't even know about it, to comment about it before the laws go through, is that going to change in the future?
Is that more of a Marshall or
Yeah,
Brian?
if you're asking about transparency of code changes in the future, that would, Marshall may be able to address that. If you're asking about transparency in the permitting process, we make
I don't mean
everything.
in the permitting process, I mean when you set these rules down, the zero
Okay,
parking and,
That's
yeah.
So it, yeah, that's a very fair point. I mean, it's done differently depending on what the policy issue is. We do very intensive planning in particular neighborhoods. So, for example, I know some of you were part of the work we did in 2011 in the West Seattle Triangle area. Tons of community meetings, tons of discussion around the zoning and the height and the rest. For a variety of reasons, the choice from our leadership in the city on the parking issue was that was well established in the comprehensive plan. And so a roundtable of folks was brought in to develop recommendations. Hearings at the city council more citywide because it affected the entire city. And they dealt with it more through the city council process. But in terms of the feedback of doing that in a more neighborhood-based way,
Well,
I'm
and
happy
to
to...
let the entire public know, not just the stakeholders, which I've seen are oftentimes developers and architects on those panels that
Okay.
have incentives
Yeah.
to have this thing.
I completely hear
All
that
right.
concern.
I get my question then in, and then we're going to go into the neighbor options with Q&A, and that's all of us. But before we do that, I have one question for you, Jerry. With the comments that folks may have made, those go to DPD. Do they get forwarded on to the developer?
Everything that comes to us is public record.
It's public record,
And
but do you send them to the developer?
we don't need to because anybody can go online and read them. So you can
Only
see
if they're
them and
interested.
the developer-
If they want to, they
If
can
they
read them
want to.
online. Okay, but you don't as a part of your practice, forward them and have that actual.
Not as a routine practice, we have certainly done that at
And I
times
know you
because
spend
when we've
heaps
had
of time.
projects that the community is saying certain things that we think that developer needs to hear, we're very willing to say, the community is very concerned about X.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're concerned, but also they are. You need to look into this. You
Okay,
get 'em.
great.
You get 'em.
So,
Yeah.
So has Mr. Biddle been informed that
we're
people
going
are
to
a
be
little upset?
going. We're going to be having question and answer now.
Okay.
So we're all going to do this.
There was
orderly.
one question that I realized I really went sideways on, didn't answer.
Yes,
You
you
asked
did.
about timing.
Yes, you
Oh, yeah.
We don't quite know yet because we're not sure if we need more information, was where I was headed.
Okay.
When we have everything we need, we write a decision.
Okay.
When we do that, everybody that's on the mailing list that has either sent in a comment or asked to be on the mailing list will get a notice we've made a decision, and that starts the appeal period. I'm guessing, and this is just a guess without even talking to Carly, that that's unlikely to happen in December. So would it happen in January? Would it be February? It's a bit hard to say. If we tell the client they need to give us information, we stop and wait till we get the information. And sometimes they are right there with it, and other times they take months to get back to us. I doubt they will in this case because I think this guy has chosen to file his building permits assuming he's going to get this. We can't issue that permit, but we can do all the ordinance and structural review. So I'm guessing he's probably ready to go and probably will respond quickly if he can, or whatever we ask him for.
So now we're going to go into a Q&A, real informal, and we've got city folks kind of up front, and I know Rob's going to come up, and I'm here, and Cindy, and there is no right or wrong answer, but we're here to give information. And so can I get an idea of who has questions? So let's start on this side, and we'll go this way, and we'll make sure that everyone gets their question answered, okay? Does that sound all right? Has anyone not had pizza? Okay.
Forget it.
Pete.
I had my arm up for everyone.
My question has to do with, I don't know, that
I made you sit
we're
there so.
making long-term decisions about structural edifices. We're putting up buildings based on a very ephemeral foundation of transit. We're issuing building permits, we're making decisions about parking, and it's all based on transit, which has about a 6-month view in the foreground. We have no idea how long that's going to be funded. We have no idea how long that service is going to be existing. And I don't see any way for us to say, okay, until we get that firmed up, we're going to stop.
Is that your question?
Yeah. Is there
I definitely hear the point that you're raising. The discussions that we had around that policy were based on the understanding from King County and others that especially the California Sea Line service, the Rapid Ride, is really the spine of their West Seattle service. And when we talked to them about anticipated cuts, which I'm sure is on many people's minds, they don't foresee major reductions of that piece. That said, one of the reasons that I mentioned that the way we do the permit review is that we look at the service at the time the application comes forward. So if there's an application, say 3 years from now and the service has changed, then that ability to access the reduced parking may not be available to that developer. I realize that doesn't change this project. But.
Next, ma'am.
This is a piece of something that I was born and raised here. This is a piece of something that disturbs me, and I'd like to know why you're breaking your own rules that you guys put up there earlier. As you move thousands of people into this urban village here, I can't get from here to downtown. I work out in Linwood. It takes me half hour, 45 minutes to get out there. These urban village, this here is not being planned with transportation in mind. You said it's based on existing transportation. It's getting worse and worse and worse. You used to be able to get over at I-5 in 5 minutes, and you can't get there from here anymore. So I want you guys to hear that, and this is a small part of a policy that is turning this place into a nightmare.
So that's your comment. You didn't really
Well,
have a question?
that's my comment. I want to hear that. I mean, it's just not just us getting information. I want them to
You want them to
understand
hear that.
And,
Okay.
Mayor McGinn and some of these people, we voted them out because of what's happening.
Okay.
So part of the perspective, again, I'm not trying to offer a counterpoint to that, but part of why I think these issues are important is because the growth is happening. And that's happening regardless. The traffic situation that I know you're aware of, I deal with as well, all of us do. That's part of the reason that transit becomes very important, and to give people an option that gets them out of the car. If you have the privilege that you can drive, you can get to work without a car, we're at a point in the city where we really have to do everything we can to encourage people to do that, because we can't get more road space. So that's part of what's going on here. I realize that there's a lot of unhappiness with the way it's being implemented, but that's the goal, is to help us all be able to get there.
And there are lots of discussions. One was last Tuesday night about the transit cuts. So go to those meetings and make your thoughts known. Chaz?
What I would like to say is I think DPD and SDOT should conspire, because we have the means of improving transit, but the city will not put bus lanes on 1st or 4th Avenue at the expense of staging parkers. So the city, it's another policy issue, but we can easily improve the transportation situation here in West Seattle. And we choose apparently not to. Again, I think it's a city council issue, but I also think it's an SDOT and a DPD issue. You guys are not working to our advantage to lure your customers.
And I was going to say, the 128 right now that's being proposed to be cut between High Point and between Morgan and South Seattle Community College, there's not going to be a route if all those cuts go through.
I really should have had an SDOT person here, and I apologize, but I didn't do that because I'm juggling several things. Other questions in this section? Then I'm going to come back to you because I'm trying to get new folks. I'm going to come back to you. You in the pink.
Pink, okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm sorry. Yeah.
We see pink from up here.
Thank you for being
I want to
patient.
thank you very much for coming into a semi-hostile environment. And I am like semi-pissed off anyway, but I really thank you for your calmness, the way you're answered. I have appreciated all of the comments that have been made. But now, I don't know what is going on are we saying that we have some input into this situation on California or not? You know, the best thing that I saw as I was walking by was that marker pen that said, "You've got to be kidding." You know, because that's the first thing any of us had any notion about. So now I keep hearing the possibility that maybe we can make an impact, or maybe it's already done. So I just want somebody, rather than to say, I need to wait until 9 o'clock to get the answer, are we going to be able to do anything for this particular situation, parking-wise, architectural-wise, or not?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to answer that one. Relative to parking, I'm not seeing it.
That's a no. You're saying that's a no.
That's a no.
Okay.
Relative to design issues, probably not. I don't know if we've looked to see if there are occasionally some bulk and scale issues that can come up in some locations. I'm going to guess that won't be the case here, but we haven't really gotten much into the review. We're still taking comments to see what issues are. I mean, one of the things that we heard recently was, gee, it looks like there's some ground settling around there. And there's going to be some requirements for them to do some more studies about that before the building permit's issued, because we want to make sure that we don't have a problem with the development of this site causing a problem to adjacent properties or the street. And you look at the street, you can see it's a little stretched right there already. And what we found out in looking at the soils information that we already have is that there is a very unstable soil layer that the street was built on and some of the properties. And there is a lot of water through there, but that's common throughout Seattle. But if the combination of excavating into that isn't done right, it can be a problem. And so we're going to require them to study that a bit further before they get their permit. So that's an issue that's already come up, and we're going to be looking at that. There may be other issues. We don't know what they all are yet.
But I'm going to answer the other half of your question. So that's their technical analysis. As a community, we can talk to the developer. I mean, we can say, you've said no parking, but maybe we can persuade you to put 6 parking places for zip cars there.
And
Or
that's,
double your bike parking. Or do something where, you know, where he's open to.
or a pitched roof, so we don't look at the rooftop.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a meeting that we're having next week
Right.
with the developer, not these folks, they're off the hook. It's with the developer, he could not come tonight, so we're having a separate meeting with the developer
And
next Thursday.
And that's why this meeting is so important to
Get
know.
So you know that, yeah.
And I think too, let me
Yeah.
add to both of your comments. I think part of the thing I've heard a couple of folks say tonight, and this is kind of where I come from, is too, you know, try and do what we can to mitigate what we can with this, talk to the developer, et cetera, but really look longer term as a community. And how do we work with Morgan Junction Association? How do we get more involved in the stuff that's working for city council? Like, let's be more proactive and look 2, 3, 4 years down the road so that we don't get surprises like this 3 years from now. Does that make sense?
Okay, so folks who haven't asked are you, and then we'll go to people who have, and back behind Glad, and then we'll get to Glad and Paul. I will not forget you. So, sir.
All right, you know, we've got all these apartments, but you can't get all in California. I spend sometimes 10 minutes because of the traffic. You know, lights, I see in your deal, roads and everything, nothing's on traffic. No traffic control. I don't see it. I worked in it for years, and I don't see it.
Yeah, no, that's true. The traffic has really increased on California. One of the things, and I know it's far from perfect, but when you're part of an urban village, as Cindy mentioned earlier, it does, in terms of the city's prioritizing capital investments, it gets a closer look. It gets higher up in the priority list. So, you know, we've seen a lot of improvements of different sorts, but we haven't come in with more traffic signals. I have a discussion in SDOT, who's not here tonight, but that I know there's an awareness of that from their staff who focus on West Seattle. What I heard from them was it's a funding question to them right now, but I know they're aware of the situation.
One of the things, they canceled those kind of houses or apartments, or whatever you want to call them, or micro, in other areas, if they're not letting them build. Is that going to happen here?
That's not apartments.
It was in the paper here about, maybe a month ago, about that they were canceling, they wouldn't let them build.
Well, there's an appeal.
It was in the paper.
Yeah, there's an appeal that, the ordinance that he was talking about that they've written, there was an appeal filed. So that means that stopped the progression of that ordinance in its tracks while the appeal is sorted out.
Oh, I see.
Well, but actually, so the apartments, microhousing can still get built. That ordinance
To
is.
the no rules.
Yeah, it's, anyway.
To the wild.
Yeah.
I gotta go.
Let go.
Okay, I have to leave.
I know, go.
I just have just one suggestion about the parking situation, which is separate from the other stuff that I was bringing up, because I know it's an urban village issue that has to do more with all projects there, but given that you've got 30 units here, and that in an urban village, eventually you're going to have a residential parking zone, RPZ, it's going to happen sooner or later. Maybe one of the mitigations is anybody who lives at that address is not going to be issued an RPZ license in the future. That would be just a suggestion for mitigation on that parking situation.
Thank you. All right, so let's go. Thank you, Vlad. Good comment. Ma'am, I think you had not had a question yet? Let's have your question first. I will come back to you, definitely.
Yeah, this is it falls in the range of the longer term question, but what would be the appropriate way to get involved when we talk about parking in a place like this, in a situation like this? To me, if I want to mitigate parking, I need to incentivize the person who doesn't own a car. It doesn't help me to allow a developer to build something at a lower cost because they don't have to provide parking. But if I were to say I was willing, whether I live in that building or not, but I'm in that neighborhood, to not own a car, is there a way that I could be incentivized? I don't know where to bring up a suggestion like that. What would I do?
Well, this is an area where, as Chaz was suggesting, we work closely with SDOT, but we've been pretty active in trying to encourage things like the Car2Go programs, the Zip Car, bike sharing, which is starting next year downtown. That's all infrastructure to support people who choose to live without a car or with fewer, or they want more alternatives. The other thing that is part of this dynamic is the units that have the option to not have to pay for a parking space. You pay a premium when you rent or purchase a unit for the parking space. And we've seen very clear prices change. So if a household wants to economize, to be able to be at a certain location that they may not otherwise afford, or they just want to be able to save some money, they can choose, to rent a unit that doesn't offer parking, or where the parking isn't.
Right, but then they have to park, assuming they have a car.
Yeah, well, to your question about how to encourage folks who choose not to have.
But you didn't quite answer the part of the question. What you said was good, but the fact that there would be better transit or bikes downtown, those are wonderful things. But they don't necessarily mean there won't be a car parked still somewhere during the day. It just may not be driven. So there's the traffic on the streets is one problem, and the parking is a different problem.
So like, for example,
So
if you
where do we address
subsidize
it?
the rent for $50 a month to ensure that they didn't have a car. That program.
How would you enforce that?
No, I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
but who do you
That's
talk
what
to?
she's trying to get at.
I think
What's
that-
an incentive for a person to actually not have a car?
Yeah.
Rapid transit.
And I'm not asking to have a result, I'm just asking where would I
I mean,
live?
that's a very interesting, that's an interesting question. That actually has been, that is the city policy. I mean, it has been to really encourage the expansion of the rapid transit.
And it might be something that we talk with the developer about and find out what his thoughts are in that, since that he's.
For example, some developers in this situation have, and the city has actually required this in some instances, provided bus passes or other infrastructure and made it completely free to their residents as a way to kind of get to that.
Probably more than 30 minutes.
Larger buildings downtown.
Back.
Can you incentivize?
Ma'am, oh, sorry. Back. With glasses, yeah. Sorry, forgot your name. Joe.
This is just a little question. I'm curious about density. So is there a code for how many people can live in a unit that is a certain number of square feet?
Yes.
The requirement for units, and that gets into the question of what's the definition of a unit. The code will allow any number of related people living together because the land use code's not going to get into family planning. But if they're not related, there's a maximum of 8 in a unit. That's the current code.
So, Joan, I'm
We
going
have
to
a
re-ask
unit
your
that-
question. How many people can live in a 235 square foot studio?
Exactly.
Under the land use code, they would not be in violation unless they had more than 8 living in there.
So we could have a full lot.
So in the micro legislation that stopped, there actually is a definition then. They recognized that that's ludicrous, and so they said, microhousing is maximum 285 feet, and you cannot have more than one person in it. That's the legislation that's currently
That's
stopped.
proposed legislation, but it doesn't count right now. So, did that answer your question? Joan? Unfortunately. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's okay. Today, can you incentivize a developer to have parking spots for the cars to go in the flex cars? Because the reality is, even if you take the bus every day to work, you get sick in the middle of the night, you need to get in a car to go to the hospital, because West Seattle has no hospital. I mean, we are really a neighborhood at risk. And when I talk to the disaster planning people, there's no way to really vacate or get people off this island in the event of an earthquake. So cars are becoming more important for the off hours, for the weekend trips. So is there any way today to do that, or is that something we should look for?
Yeah, there
in
are
the
tools
future?
to do that. And they're not in place right now. One of the things that's in that proposed legislation related to micro housing is to increase the provision for bicycle parking and for car sharing and those kind of requirements
To
of
take them off our
the
city,
micro
our
housing.
neighborhood streets and put them back in the building.
Right, but it's not currently
Okay.
in the regulations of this project.
Okay.
And that is